Hi all, welcome back to Tallulah Talks. That is me. And today is Wednesday, which means it is Killer Wednesday. And on Killer Wednesdays, we discuss serial killers and killers who have just killed one time. And I like to discuss the possible psychological explanations as to why these killers committed these crimes. This in no way justifies what they did. It just helps explain why these events could have happened. As psychologists, we kind of look into the explanations of things. And so with my book of stories, today is a really interesting one. And do you know what? I say that every time. It's so interesting to me. And I remember hearing about this. I think I was watching it on like a true crime thing when I was younger, and it's about Alyssa Bustamante. I hope that's how you say her name, I'm not sure. But at the age of 15, she was convicted of murdering 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. So looking into kind of the background, it seems she had quite a traumatic first couple of years of her life. She was born in Missouri, and unfortunately her parents were drug addicts, and so she was then raised by her grandparents. Her dad spent most of his time in jail. It never said what for, but it could have just been for petty crimes or possession of drugs. And her mum was an alcoholic, and this was kind of known to have a very profound effect on Alyssa, even with her grandparents providing a pretty stable living, and she grew up having a pretty normal life with her grandparents. She was pretty normal in appearance, and friends said she actually wrote poems and really enjoyed a joke. She regularly attended church, the Church of the Latter-day Saints, and participated in youth activities within this church. So on the outside, it seems that she was, the perfect kid. In 2007, when Alyssa was, I think she was 13, she attempted to commit suicide, and she was then sent to a psychiatric hospital in St. Martin's for 10 days. There's also the trauma of when Alyssa was younger and having contact with her parents, she frequently saw her mum overdose. And like I say, despite having that stable environment, this definitely had an effect on Alyssa. She often had violent and suicidal thoughts, and again tried to commit suicide at 13. And this was when she was prescribed antidepressants because it was believed that she was depressed. But this was actually a wrong diagnosis. What went underdiagnosed was an antisocial personality disorder. So personality disorders in general is a mental illness which is affects how one thinks, how one feels and relates to others. So they may not feel empathy towards others, they may not feel sympathy, and it can sort of bring in intrusive thoughts. And it is characterised by impulsive, irresponsible and even criminal behaviour. So one with this disorder can be manipulative, deceitful, and completely reckless. And this actually describes a lot of Alyssa's actions. While Alyssa did get good grades, she did have a dark side. She often cut herself, and she had what was described as Gothic style morbid interests. So she would cut the word hate into herself and a 1960s peace symbol. She had over 300 cuts on her body, along with burn and bite marks. So it's very clear that she was a very troubled young girl. Whether her grandparents knew about these behaviours, I'm not entirely sure. She had listed her hobbies online as cutting and killing people. She talked to friends about this, but they never ever took her too seriously because, as friends had said, she never acted aggressive or violent. So now we're going to talk about the victim, and unfortunately, because Elizabeth, the victim, is very overshadowed by the actual crime, there's not much on Elizabeth that I could find. She was friends with Alyssa's younger sister, Emma, and Alyssa saw Elizabeth as the perfect target for her murderous fantasies. In October 2009, Alyssa prepared herself for murder by digging a shallow grave in the woods behind her house 5 days prior to the murder. Elizabeth Olten was only 9 when she was killed by Alyssa. She lived in Missouri with her mum Patty and 2 siblings, Anthony and Stephanie, and she actually lived next door to Alyssa and her grandparents and her siblings. On Wednesday, October 1st, 2009, Elizabeth was at home for rehearsing a school play, while Patty, her mother, got dinner ready. At 5 p.m, Elizabeth's neighbour and friend Emma, Alyssa's little sister, knocked on the door and asked if she could come out and play. In the beginning, Patty originally said no because I think their tea was cooking, but after the children had bed, she eventually gave in and basically told Elizabeth to be home by 6 p.m. At 6 p.m, Elizabeth hadn't shown up, and Patty just kind of had this gut feeling that something was wrong. Elizabeth was known to be terrified of the dark, and she would always come home before it got dark. Patty called to Emma's house, and again, Emma lived with her grandparents and Alyssa, her older sister, and her 2 brothers. Patty asked after Elizabeth, and Karen, the grandmother, told Patty that she had not seen Elizabeth. Emma was in the house, but Elizabeth had never been with her that Karen knew of. Patty then called the police and reported her 9-year-old daughter missing. Police arrived right away and called in the fire department and other emergency departments, and at 10 p.m, the whole neighbouring community came out and looked for Elizabeth. At this point, police told Patty that there were no signs of foul play. But Patty had told police that Elizabeth did have a cell phone and that she had tried calling the cell phone, but there was no answer. So 24 hours after the disappearance, police decided to try and find the cell phone by finding out which cell towers it had pinged off of. And there was 3 different pings that said Elizabeth's phone was in the nearby woods behind Emma and Alyssa's house. The area was quite large, so police did call in for more help, and they had cadaver dogs and dive teams, but they didn't find anything at this point. So then after this, police then went to talk to Emma, who I believe she was like 7 at the time. I think she was younger. And originally she did lie. I guess she just didn't want to get into trouble. I mean, she's only a kid. So her first story was that she had been with Elizabeth for about an hour, and then she saw Elizabeth walk home. It was unsure why Emma changed her story, but as I've just said, she might have been really scared to get into trouble. Her second story was that they were in the woods and that Emma had gotten stuck in a bush. So it was quite painful for her, so she had called her older sister Alyssa to come and help her. And Emma and Alyssa and the 2 brothers were pretty much all assimilated to the Olten children. But it was believed that obviously Alyssa had come and helped Emma, and then Emma just went home with Elizabeth. That was kind of the story. The police pretty much had all children accounted for in the neighbourhood during this time. However, they hadn't yet spoken to Alyssa. She was like the only one that wasn't accounted for. So after hearing the second story, investigators then went back into the woods and found the shallow grave that Alyssa had dug 5 days prior. They went to speak to the teenager at her grandparents' house, and she admitted to digging the hole, saying that it was just for fun. And a lot of what she was saying, the police found pretty strange. Alyssa was then questioned by an FBI agent, and again, he thought her behaviour was very strange. Investigators then obtained a warrant to search the family home and Alyssa's bedroom. So they found lots of drawings and writings on Alyssa's walls, and they were pretty disturbing, especially for a 15-year-old. There was one quote, "It was written in blood, it was written in blood." There was also a poem found that Alyssa had written, and it says, quote, "I want to see blood because I like it." The agent then found that Alyssa had a fascination with hurting and killing people and hurting herself, and they knew this information because they had actually found Alyssa's journal, and it was actually thought that Alyssa deliberately left this journal out to be found. On another wall was a drawing of someone with slash marks on their necks and arms, and next to this drawing it said Emma, and that kind of showed investigators that she wanted to hurt her little sister. She also fantasized about hurting her family, and the police found YouTube videos where Alyssa had filmed her younger brothers and had encouraged them to touch an electric fence. She wanted to see them get hurt. And in the video, I think there's like a caption, and it says, this is where it gets good. We get to see my brothers get hurt," end quote. Investigators, like I said, found Alyssa's journal, and it is possible that she did want that journal found because it wasn't hidden away anywhere. I think it was pretty much out in the open. There was various entries that talked about burning down her house with her family inside. Quote, "If I don't talk about it, I bottle it up, and when I explode, someone's going to die," end quote. And there was an entry written 1 week before the murder had happened. And it was dated October. Yeah, sorry, there was a lost entry. There was a lost entry that she had written on the day of Emma's disappearance, but they did manage to find out what this entry had said. So she had basically scribbled blue ink over this entry, leaving only a small part of writing visible, saying, "I got to go to church now, LOL," end quote. She was then brought to the police station with her grandma because this was pretty much enough for her to be held for questioning. It seemed that she was a very disturbed young girl. Before the interview, the detective tried to salvage this entry in the journal, and they actually used a black light and could actually make out the words "slit throat." She, like her sister, she had a few different stories about what had happened, but she did eventually confess. So Detective David Rice asked Alyssa what had happened to the young girl Elizabeth. Her demeanour immediately changed to quivering and shaking, but she didn't tell them the truth right away. So the first story that she had told was that Alyssa and Elizabeth had walked through the woods together. Elizabeth then tripped and fell, banged her head, and had just died instantly. But police immediately knew that this was bullshit. They showed Alyssa her own journal entry and asked if Elizabeth had in fact had her throat slit, to which Alyssa had replied yes, and then admitted what had happened. And at this, her grandma just broke down in tears and left the room, and this was when Alyssa proceeded to tell them the truth. She had basically told her sister Emma to go and ask Elizabeth to come out and play, so to kind of lure her out. And then once outside, Alyssa had told her little sister to just go home, and her little sister just did that. She then told Elizabeth that she had something to show her, but it would take a 15-minute walk into the woods. And the little girl kind of, it's someone older, and when you're little, you listen to someone older. And, she thought this was going to be something fun, and unfortunately, it ended her life. Um, Alyssa was actually hiding a kitchen knife and had dug a shallow grave 5 days prior, so she had planned this for quite some time. She, when she got the young kid into the woods, she then began strangling her, grabbed a knife, and stabbed the little girl 7 times in the chest. And when this was done, she slit the young girl's throat. And then she buried Elizabeth and kind of covered her body with leaves. And the grave, like I say, it was not that deep. It was a very shallow grave. And police basically had said to Alyssa, look, you're going to need to show us where you've buried the body. And they could actually, when they kind of came across the body, it was kind of obvious that there was a body there because there was parts of her body sticking out. I mean, it was pretty obvious. Analysts were then able to confirm the last entry in Alyssa's diary, which said, quote, I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them, slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead, end quote. Alyssa was then arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and she was to stand trial as an adult for murder and armed criminal action, which is, she obviously had the knife and she intended to use it. The trial took quite some time to happen because this happened when Alyssa was 15, and I think it took like 3 years to get to trial. I don't know if it kept getting postponed or whatnot, I didn't really say. But the trial began in 2012. Alyssa was now 18 and she pled not guilty due to mental health. The defence basically put forward to have a lighter sentence due to Alyssa's mental health, and that the meds she was given for a wrong diagnosis caused her to act on impulses. But the prosecution had then put forward that there was evidence that Alyssa had planned to murder someone, and that someone being Elizabeth, for 5 days before following through. So that doesn't say impulsive, you know. She stated that she killed someone, or she wanted to kill someone because she wanted to know how it would feel to kill. During this time, Alyssa saw many mental health professionals, and she was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, which is a type of depression, and borderline personality disorder, as well as the personality disorder that I had said earlier. Borderline personality disorder affects a person's thoughts, feelings, and their interactions with other people. And it can include that person being emotionally unstable. They do have upsetting thoughts and can act on impulse. And it is linked to trauma during childhood, which we know that Alyssa did suffer from seeing her mother and father doing drugs, abusing drugs and alcohol. So this would have had something to do with how things kind of turned out. And again, this isn't to justify anything. This is kind of just one of those possible explanations as to why this horrible act was committed. She was then sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years for armed criminal action. And she does have the possibility of parole after 35 years and 5 months. And that is the sad and horrible case of how Elizabeth Olten was murdered by Alyssa Bustamante. And this isn't to say that everyone with those mental illnesses are going to commit these acts. This just so happened to be the case for Alyssa, who had suffered quite a bit of trauma when she was young, and through going through a misdiagnosis and getting the wrong medication and not getting the help she needed, this kind of was then how events unfolded. If you have any true crime events you would like me to cover, definitely put it in the comment section, and I will see you guys on Saturday for Saturday's Haunting Hour.